So today we're going to talk about a story that just absolutely blew up on the internet. It all starts with a very small, very charming animal, and it ends in this huge firestorm of controversy that brings up some major questions about rules, compassion, and yeah, even government power.
And really, when you boil it all down, that's what this is. A story about one little squirrel.
But this wasn't just any squirrel. This was Peanut, and he ended up becoming, well, a symbol. A real flashpoint for a fight that got super heated. All right, so let's get into it.
All right, first things first. Let's meet the little guy at the center of all this. And I've got to tell you, this was not your average, everyday squirrel you see running up a tree.
So Peanut was a rescue. He had some health problems, which meant he was considered non-releasable. Basically, there was just no way he could survive out in the wild on his own. Instead, he had this really sweet life with his caregiver, a guy named Mark. And, through social media, his amazing little personality just took off. He had this huge online following of people who just loved him.
And this quote, man, it just says it all, right? It really gets at the connection people felt. For them, this was just a pure, simple story about compassion. You've got a guy giving a second chance to this little animal that wouldn't have survived otherwise. The whole community, they just adored the two of them.
And then, well, everything changed. That really heartwarming story, it took a really sharp, really dark turn that honestly, nobody who followed Peanut saw coming.
So word starts getting out that the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, showed up at the property. But here's the kicker, it wasn't just one or two officers. We're talking reports of dozens of workers sent to grab Peanut and another animal, a raccoon. I mean, the sheer scale of it just seemed insane to his supporters. A total overreaction.
Okay, so what was the official reason? Why this massive response? Well, the DEC's whole justification was built around rabies concerns, and that got kicked into high gear after one of their workers was supposedly bitten during the raid, which, by the way, took like 5 hours. So from their point of view, a bite means you have to follow a very specific, very serious procedure, no exceptions.
But here's the thing. Peanut's fans, and even a bunch of wildlife experts, they immediately called foul. They pointed out that, squirrels are actually super low risk for rabies. Like, there has never been a single documented case of a squirrel giving rabies to a person. Ever. So, for a lot of people, that made the DEC's main reason for all this seem, well, pretty shaky.
So you can probably guess what happened next, right? When this news hit the internet, people weren't just sad. They were furious. We're talking pure, unfiltered rage.
I mean, people were not holding back. The words they used to describe the DEC's actions were just, wow. This comment right here, nefarious, rollerball-wielding zealots. It just perfectly captures that feeling of absolute anger. Like this beloved, harmless little guy was being targeted by some kind of evil, faceless bureaucracy.
And for a lot of folks, this whole thing quickly became bigger than just Peanut. It tapped right into this much bigger frustration people have with what they see as government overreach. It felt like watching a powerful agency use a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Literally.
So when all the smoke cleared, what you really had was this classic and really tough showdown, right? On one side, you have the strict letter of the law, and on the other, you have the messy, human details of a unique, compassionate situation.
And this really is the heart of the whole conflict. You've got the DEC's side. They're working with these really strict New York laws that say you can't keep wild animals, period. And if someone gets bitten, rabies testing is mandatory. These rules are there to protect everyone, wildlife, and people. But then you have the community's argument. They're saying, hold on, Peanut wasn't really wild. He couldn't survive out there. They saw the raid as complete overkill and felt like this was exactly the kind of situation where a little common sense and compassion should have allowed for an exception to the rule.
And then someone online made this fascinating point that just adds this whole other layer to it, right? If our ancestors had kept the wild wild, we wouldn't have cats or dogs. I mean, that really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? It makes you question where we even draw these super strict lines between what's wild and what's a pet. Now, this is the really sad part of the story. Peanut was ultimately euthanized, but his story, it didn't end there. All of that anger, all of that heartbreak, it didn't just fade away. It got turned into this really powerful movement for change.
People didn't just sit around. They started organizing, like immediately. A petition on change.org just exploded with signatures. People were flooding the DEC's phone lines and inboxes demanding to know what happened. And there was this huge push to support local wildlife rehabilitators, the very people who deal with these complicated situations every single day.
And the end goal here wasn't just about getting justice for Peanut. It was about something bigger. It became this call to actually reform the policies themselves, to create laws that can find a balance between the rules and just, basic reason and compassion, especially for animals that can't be released back into the wild.
So at the end of the day, Peanut's story leaves us all with this really big, really tough question. When these black and white rules collide with what feels like basic compassion, which one is supposed to win? And honestly, there's just no easy answer to that.